G.I. Joe should be one of the biggest names in pop culture right now, but it's not. So today we'll be discussing why that is. G.I. Joe started out as a toy line in the 60s and later expanded to getting its own TV show and comic book series with Marvel. I first got into G.I. Joe comics because of the toys. While G.I. Joe's biggest boom was during the 80s and 90s, they were still big when I was growing up in the early 2000s. You could walk into any Walmart, there would be G.I. Joe toys everywhere. That's how I got into the franchise. Anytime I had money, I would spend it on G.I. Joe toys. My favorite was a generic Marine that I still have to this day. It was a really well-made toy that I loved playing with as a kid, and considering how much I played with it, and it's still in one piece today, shows how well it was made. But that was back when Hasbro actually cared about their own properties instead of just the licenses they get from people like Star Wars. I got into the G.I. Joe lore because there was a 2-pack that Hasbro was selling at my local Walmart that had Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow, and a DVD of a 44-minute movie called G.I. Joe Spy Troops. At the time, I loved the movie. It was just 44 minutes of CGI action and G.I. Joe cheesiness. It was great. Going back, it doesn't hold up very well, but 6-year-old me loved it. That one movie got me into G.I. Joe as a whole. They weren't just toys to me anymore, they were big, interesting stories out there about some really cool characters. So from then on out, I checked out anything G.I. Joe I could, like the original American Hero TV show and the CGI direct-to-DVD movie Valor vs. Venom. But that was then. Let's talk about now. What is Hasbro currently doing to get people into G.I. Joe? Well, let's go to their website to find out. And there's nothing here. Hasbro doesn't care anymore. G.I. Joe is one of Hasbro's biggest franchises. It's up there with Transformers, but they've neglected it and have no clue what to do. There are no toys anywhere. You walk into a Walmart, there's nothing. There's no TV show currently going on. The 2 movies that came out in theaters are garbage. They seem to have given up on their movies as well. Hasbro has no clue what they're doing with G.I. Joe. They're letting one of the most beloved franchises from the 80s and 90s just sit and rot. Hasbro just doesn't seem to care anymore. G.I. Joe has had 2 live-action movies released in theaters, G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra and G.I. Joe Retaliation, neither of which showed any respect for the source material or offered up anything interesting. Rise of Cobra made heavy duty, a guy from Chicago, British. Baroness was one of the most badass members of Cobra, but she was changed to Duke's former girlfriend that was now brainwashed into working for Cobra. And that's just to name a few of the bizarre changes from how Larry Hama originally wrote these characters. The plot for Rise of Cobra was just a generic, a bad guy has powerful weapons, stop him before he uses it. Now, I'm not saying G.I. Joe has to be the most thought-provoking, complex story ever, but when you're going to change everything else about G.I. Joe, at least make the story interesting. But Rise of Cobra didn't really do anything good. Then you have Retaliation. Retaliation had Roadblock as the main character and now leader of G.I. Joe. Roadblock was always a great supporting character, but he wasn't a main character or the leader. But they had The Rock, so he had to be front and center. You can't have The Rock as a supporting character, no. They even killed off Duke specifically so they could focus on The Rock. This movie was all about The Rock, not G.I. Joe. While it was a step up from the garbage that was Rise of Cobra, it was still nothing special. Now, there is one thing the movies got right, and that's the casting for Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes. Byung-hun Lee is a perfect Storm Shadow. He's great. He seriously is the best part of the movies. It's a shame they haven't done much with the character in the movies though, because this guy is great. When they do reboot these movies, I hope he stays. And Ray Park does a great job as Snake Eyes as well, and has clear love for the character. He even co-wrote a comic book miniseries about Snake Eyes. While the live-action movies have been complete garbage, there was a good animated G.I. Joe movie that aired on Adult Swim called G.I. Joe Resolute, and it was awesome. It's not a perfect movie or anything really that amazing, but it is a real treat for G.I. Joe fans. It's something that I think every Joe fan should watch. The movie was action-packed and had the cheesiness that G.I. Joe was known for. Not corny in a cringy way, but corny in an 80s cartoon way, and I loved it. Most G.I. Joe fans loved it too. It was like the cartoons we watched growing up, but more violent. But for some reason, Hasbro never made a follow-up. Even though the feedback was great, they were focused on their live-action movies, which make no sense considering how good this short animated movie was. It just didn't add up. This movie couldn't have cost that much for them to make. It aired on Adult Swim. They had Steve Blum do like 90% of the voice acting in the movie. People loved it, but we never got a sequel, which really stuck. But, you know, they decided to focus on the live-action movie. So, hey, I'll let you be the judge. Tell me which one you would rather watch. Yeah, I think the winner here is pretty clear. I loved G.I. Joe growing up, but after I'd watched the animated series and some of the movies, there was a bit of a drought for content for those characters until I found the comics. I went through long boxes of back issues of G.I. Joe comics at my comic shop and found so many great comics. I started reading Chuck Dixon's IDW run on G.I. Joe, and I also started reading the classic Larry Hama Marvel G.I. Joe comics. It was awesome. IDW even had a great thing going on. They had Real American Hero, which was a series written by Hama that picked up where his Marvel G.I. Joe run left off and was a place for classic G.I. Joe fans. And you had Chuck Dixon and Mike Costa's G.I. Joe series, which was a lot darker, grittier, more violent, and told more complex stories. It was a great time. IDW had something for every Joe fan. If you wanted something classic like what you grew up with, read Hama series. If you felt that you grew out of that but still wanted to read about your favorite Joes in a more up-to-date series, then you could check out what Dixon and Costa were doing. Sadly, right now the comics absolutely suck. There's only one ongoing series and some occasional miniseries that happen where they'll team them up with someone. Like right now, they're going against the $6 Million Man. American Hero is still going on, but Larry Hama has run out of ideas and is still writing on his name and the fact that he's the godfather of G.I. Joe. That's nothing new for comics. Frank Miller's been doing that for a while. Frank Miller hasn't really written anything great in forever, but he's Frank Miller, so people will still publish his books. People will still be like, oh yeah, we'll take him because of the name. Same thing that's going on with Larry Hama right now. Hasn't written anything good in forever, but because he's Larry Hama, everyone's like, okay, we gotta keep him on G.I. Joe. We can't kick him off for, say, a better writer. Currently, Hama's stories are uninspired and boring, and completely relies on his name and shock value. Oh, books aren't selling? I'll just kill off Snake Eyes and then turn him into a Hispanic woman. And no, I'm not joking, even though I wish I was. Hama had Snake Eyes suicide bomb with a grenade to take out Serpentor, and that's how he died. Yep, the best ninja in the world went out like a punk. He decided to suicide bomb Serpentor, and that's how he went out. Yeah, that's the most ninja thing I know of. Initially, Snake Eyes was replaced by Kamakura. Kamakura, if you don't know who he is sort of like the Robin to Snake Eyes. So Snake Eyes is Batman, Kamakura is Robin. But he's his apprentice, which made sense that he would take over the mantle. But Kamakura was stripped of everything that made him a different character in the process of him becoming Snake Eyes, because Hama literally just turned him into Snake Eyes. When Snake Eyes died, Kamakura got into an accident where his face got burned, his throat got messed up, so he no longer could talk and has to always wear a mask. Sound familiar? Then later on, they introduced female Snake Eyes. A Hispanic woman took up the mantle of Snake Eyes and is sort of possessed by Snake Eyes himself currently. It's weird. Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense, but that's what Hama's going with. Like I said, he ran out of ideas a long time ago. But guess what? Shock value sells! Who needs good storytelling when shock value will sell your book for you? Hama pulled what has become really redundant and boring in the comic book industry today. Thor is now a woman. Wolverine is now dead, and X-23 is now female Wolverine. Iron Man is gone, and now Riri Williams is Iron Man. Captain Marvel is now a woman. It's just repetitive and boring, and the comic book industry keeps doing it. Chuck Dixon even talked about this forever ago when he had an interview on a podcast.
Well, comics are kind of, they don't sell the great numbers. They're not really, other than the movies and things like that and television shows. The comics themselves don't have as big an impact on pop culture as they used to. So they have a hard time getting media coverage. When they found out that by being outrageous, they could get media coverage. Back in the 90s, it started with, they killed Superman, and that got them on the nightly news. And they fell in love with the idea of being on the nightly news, how to outrage the public. And I started running in the 90s when they would start, well, what if this character was this, or what if this character was that, which I always rejected because They thought, well, we can get media coverage.
Shock value sells, so they just, instead of doing good storytelling, they ditched it for shock value because they realized they'd get way more promotion and more people would buy their books. If they did that, the problem is shock value doesn't last. It'll sell you an issue or two, and then after that, everyone's like, okay, this stuff's garbage. I came to check out the new thing to see how it was. Turns out it sucks. I'm leaving, and you end up losing the consistency. You'll get a huge spike, but the consistency is gone and you lose the true fans. It just really sucks. And he even tried to soften the blow of making a new female Snake Eyes by giving you Kamakura, so you have a Snake Eyes that is at least familiar, but the problem is he's neither Snake Eyes nor Kamakura, so no one cares about him. He acts like Snake Eyes, but we know it's not the genuine article, so who cares? He acts nothing like Kamakura, so there's nothing interesting there. When Dick Grayson took over as Batman, he didn't just suddenly turn into the same character that Bruce was as Batman. No, he was still Dick Grayson under that suit. This Batman walked and talked and acted like Dick Grayson, so it was interesting. Hama didn't do that. But that's just talking about the current series. Remember we had that awful series not too long ago from Aubrey Peterson, which was just the worst. He didn't understand any of the characters. The stories were boring and the art was so bland. Nothing with that series worked. How do you go from a legend like Chuck Dixon writing amazing G.I. Joe stories to a communist who doesn't even know anything about G.I. Joe at the helm of the book? It just really sucks to see how far the comics have fallen. They used to be so good. Hasbro just needs to get their act together. G.I. Joe could easily be one of the biggest franchises out there, but Hasbro doesn't know what they're doing. They won't even comment on the current state of G.I. Joe. There's nothing even on their website about it. Even if you wanted to be like, hey, what at least are they doing right now while they're sitting on their hands? There's nothing. They don't even have anything on their website. It's so bad. Sure, we got a Snake Eyes movie on the way according to Hollywood Reporter, but I want something official from Hasbro so I can say that they actually have faith in this franchise. At the end of the day, I'm just a diehard G.I. Joe fan that wants to see this franchise do well, and it really hurts to see how little Hasbro cares. There's just rich characters in a world here that they could explore, but they're doing nothing. But anyways, I want to know, what are your thoughts on Hasbro? How have they been handling G.I. Joe in your opinion? Let me know in the comments below. I'm curious what other G.I. Joe fans or what non-G.I. Joe fans think from like the outside looking in on this whole situation. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys later.